Hi there and welcome to this video. Now in this session I'm going to show you how to make super cute Halloween tea light decorations. That'll be perfect as little gifts, decorations, or even something that you could sell, just like this pumpkin here. Right then, so we're going to be modelling up our pumpkin in Aspire. So we're going to jump straight in now. We're going to go and create a brand new file. So we're going to start with a single-sided job. Okay, now in here we're going to go with a width of 9 inches, a height of 8 inches, and our material thickness is going to be 0.86. It's quite precise. So this is some oak that we used before, and that's what we're going to put in there. So we're going to set our Z0 position to the material surface and our XY datum position in the lower left-hand corner. Now, as we are working with 3D models, or at least we're going to be creating 3D models, we're going to pay attention to our modelling resolution, where we're going to have that set to very high. And that just ensures that we can really maximise the amount of resolution or pixels that we've got in our job when we create our 3D parts. So we'll go ahead and press OK. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at drawing up the initial shape for our pumpkin, and I drew in a few sketches and just sketched a very quick sketch of a pumpkin. Then with my phone I took a photo of it, and then I've just emailed that to myself, and I'm just going to bring that into the software. So in order for you to bring bitmaps in, you just want to hit on this icon here where you can import a bitmap. Okay, and here I'm just going to import this jack here, and you can see that's a picture, a very rough photo of my pumpkin sketch. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of size it. I want to make sure that the pumpkin fills pretty much the majority of my job space. So we're going to look at sizing that, cropping it back, but the first thing that I need to do is I need to look at rotating it. So a nice shortcut key for you is using 0 to rotate clockwise. You can use the number 9 and that will rotate that anti-clockwise, and you can see we've got that in position there. So one of the things I like to do is I like to draw a rectangle around the job space. So you can see I'm just snapping that there, and I'm going to use this as a guide for me to stretch my bitmap out to, and then ultimately I'll use that then to crop that bitmap back. So we're going to take that, we're just going to stretch it out like so, and then using my arrow keys I'm just going to nudge that up, and then if we just zoom in a little, see I can go a little bit more. So holding down shift just scales that out from the center in proportion. Okay, so something like that looks okay. So with that bitmap selected, we're also going to select our rectangle vector, and then we're going to use this option here to crop our bitmap, and then that will just get rid of all of the extras in the photo that we don't actually need. Okay, so we're going to go into our 3D view, and I'm going to switch on that bitmap here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at drawing up vectors that we need in order for us to use those vectors to model up our pumpkin. And so we're going to look at creating a base shape to begin with, and then we'll draw in all of the details. What do I mean by that? So I'm on about the undulations on the pumpkin, the mouth, the nose, and the eyes. Right then, so we're going to start by going into the polyline tool. Okay, so when you're creating vectors that are to be used with 3D modeling, you want to ensure that you have nice, smooth vectors, and the nicer and the cleaner that your vectors are, the better quality of relief you're going to get, which is why I like to use the polyline tool. Okay, now the way I use this is I just simply click to position my first point, and then I just go around just loosely following my photo here and looking at all of the points at which I feel would make a nice curve, and then I just click to apply them. So you can see here I'm just clicking like so here, and then we'll just click, come down, click, click. And at the moment you're probably thinking, wow, It looks very angled for a pumpkin, but we're going to go in afterwards using the node edit tools to really smooth them off. And this is my favourite way of drawing. Okay, so to close that then, I used the tab key there. And then what we can do is we can close out, and we're going to go into N for node edit, and then I'm just going to, with my mouse, just drag a selection box all over that vector, all over those points, and you can see that all of those points are now highlighted, and if I press S on the keyboard, that will smooth them, and you can see straight away it's actually not too bad. But we're just going to go in there and we're just going to fine tune this, ensuring that our vectors follow the original image in the background, and that everything looks okay. And it's simply a case of just going through each point. Everything looks pretty good so far, and then when we get to the bottom here, all we're going to do is just sort of tweak those vectors, pulling on the handles. What we want to do is we just want to follow the curvature of the actual sketch itself, and we're just going to kind of repeat this, and you can see going through there, pull that handle down, move that over again, following the bitmap that we've got in the background, pull that out and then move that over, and then perhaps we'll pull this handle down. And you can see that when you pull on the handles, like one handle, it would affect one of the spans, and so you just get an instant sort of visualization of the effect that you're applying to that vector there. And you can see we've got a nice shape there, pull that out, and let's go up to the top. Okay, so it's got kind of a flat edge here, so if we take this handle and we can pull that out, and it'll just give us a nice rounded curve. Okay, and we'll pull that handle just to bring that out. So I'm pretty much happy with that. So now we're going to look at drawing in the vectors for the stalk on the top here. So we're going to go back into the polyline tool. I'm just going to zoom in over here, and again I'm just going to just roughly sketch in the shape there using that polyline tool. Bring that in and then press tab, and that will close that off for us. N on the keyboard for node edit mode, and then we'll just drag select all of those nodes there, press S. I can see I missed one here, so let's just hover over those and then select them, press S to smooth them out. Okay, so again we're just going to just fine tune this shape, making use of those handles, and then we can pull that over like so. And I find doing this with the polyline tool in straight mode, I just have much better control over how my overall vector will look. Okay, so that's pretty much the base and the stalk. So now we're going to look at focusing on the details. Okay, so you can see in my sketch, if we just come out of node edit mode there, and also if we just right click on our image and go to appearance, we're just going to just take that fading of that bitmap away so we can see that a little bit more clearly. And you can see in my sketch I've sort of referenced the curves that are going to be on that pumpkin. And those are the details that I want to apply now. So what we're going to do, again, go into the polyline tool, and we're going to just click here, and we're just going to, again, just draw that out. The nice thing about this sort of style of 3D modelling is that it is fairly simple, just some kind of simple bold shapes, and then when you go on to model with those vectors, you end up with quite an impressive model, but it is actually quite simple to create all of the sort of the skeleton work, the vectors and whatnot from the beginning. Okay, so we've got those, so let's just close out, and then we'll start by looking at editing these vectors first. So go into node edit mode. Again, let's just pull on that, S to smooth it all out, S to smooth it out, and then we'll just quickly go in and tweak the actual nose. Generally, it looks pretty good, and it looks pretty good because I've sort of, where I've positioned all of those points when initially drawing out the polyline, I've done it consciously, knowing that it's going to be a curve, and because where I've positioned them, it's kind of in a way that when I come to smooth it, it's going to be, it won't require so much editing afterwards. Okay, so we're just going to take that and then move that up. That's pretty much that. So I'm happy with that. So what we'll do now is we'll go back into the polyline tool, and then we'll do the details for some of the other shapes. So we'll go and start somewhere over here, and again, let's just click, 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 and we'll come down to the bottom, click, 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 and then tab to close that, and then the same for up here, click, click, click. Okay, and then a tab to close that, and then finally in the center there, we're just going to draw in that center shape, and then tab to close that. And again, into node edit mode, big bold selection there, press S on the keyboard, and then that will enable us to smooth it and adjust the shape there. And pull on those handles. And obviously I've been doing this for a long time now, so initially you might find it's a little bit unusual to sort of have to faff around with all of your nodes, but with practice it does get a lot easier, and by doing it this way where you're able to control the nodes, you're really able to control the overall shape, and you're going to get a much better component out of it, like the smoother that it is. Okay, so last one, into node edit mode, smooth that out, pull it out. So we kind of want to get fairly close to the vector either side of it. So I'm just going to pull that out over here, pull that out over there, bring that one over here, and that's pretty much that there. Right then, so we're going to do the same for the stalk. However, at this stage, I feel it'd be a lot easier if I just go ahead and we'll just jump into another file where we've got those vectors created. We're just going through the same process. Right then, so you can see we've got these added extra vectors for the stalk. Literally just went through the same process as what we'd seen for the actual main pumpkin. So we've just got a few more things to draw. So if we switch on our bitmap, so we've just got the mouth, the nose, and the eyes, okay? So for the eyes, you're going to want to do this based off the diameter of your T-light. And generally, T-lights are 1.5 inches. Measure it just to double check. I'm just going to go a little bit bigger than that so I don't have to worry about doing any negative allowances or anything like that in the toolpath. So just making it a little bit bigger so that it can fit nicely inside. Okay, so I'm just going to go and draw a circle. I can actually see in my form already that we've got a diameter of 1.56. So I'm just going to draw that in, click to draw that in as well, close out, and actually I might want to just nudge that around just so it roughly follows the original sketch. Okay, so something like that looks okay. That's pretty much the eyes done. So now we're going to move on to the mouth. So we're going to go into the polyline tool. Easy peasy one here. We're going to click at this point here, click at the other corner of the mouth over here, click somewhere roughly around the center, and then we're just going to join that back up. And then in our trusty node editing mode, pressing N on that keyboard, we're going to look at just applying a smooth to this node here. And then for this Bezier here, for this span here, we're going to turn that into a Bezier. So you can press B on your keyboard, that's the shortcut key to do that, and it will just turn that span into a Bezier span. And the reason why I didn't want to smooth all of the nodes is because I still want kind of harsh corners at the top of the mouth here, and so that just enables those to stay in straight mode, whilst we can adjust those handles to create the curvature for that mouth. And you can see how easy that was, and we'll just pull that one down there. Okay, so that's sort of the base of the mouth. So now we need to draw in some funky teeth. So to do that, we're actually going to look at using the freehand drawing tool. And I'm using this just because it's just easy to get some kind of like rough looking tooth in here. I'm just going to click to draw out there. And then again over here, just going to draw that in like so, close out, and then we're going to use our trim tool. I'm just going to trim this away like so. And we'll do the same over here, and then we'll be left. As long as we've got rejoin trimmed sections ticked, we should have one closed vector that has the combination of the teeth with that smile. Right then, so now we're on to the final vector here, and that is for the nose. So again, let's just use that freehand drawing tool, and we're just going to roughly draw in somewhat of a triangle, and we'll just tab to close that. Okay, you can see it's done that a little bit strange, but no worries here. What we'll do is we'll just go ahead, delete that out here, delete that there, and then we'll just pull that handle so it looks something like this. It's kind of crooked, looks very pumpkin-y, if that's a word. And then you can see we've got that there. Right then, so we're pretty much done with all of our vectors now. So now we're going to move on to the modelling stage. Now the way that we're going to do this is we're going to model from bottom up. Generally that's the best sort of practice of how to model 3D reliefs. Start with your bases, add your details on top. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start by creating our base shape using this vector here, along with the stalk, this one here. And then what we're going to do, once we're happy with those shapes, we're then going to build on top of that to create the detail using all of the other vectors. So to help us try and stay super organised, we're going to go into our levels here, and we're just going to go and rename that level, and we're just going to call this one base, okay? And the way we're going to model this is pretty much using the create rounded shape tool. And this is where you need a closed vector, and then we create a round shape where we can interactively figure out the sort of profile, the height of it, and we have lots of different options to control that, and it's super easy to do as well. So I'm just going to tilt my view sort of like this. I'm also going to just switch off our bitmap as I don't need to see that anymore. I'm going to take our outer vector here, sorry, our base vector, so this one here, and we're going to go into our create rounded shape tool, okay? Now, since we updated this, I absolutely love using this because it's so interactive, it's so instant, you can see everything as it comes out. So here we're just going to pull out a shape, okay? So I'm just going to go with quite a sort of bold shape here. However, I'm actually going to bring that right down. I'm going to do that using this tool here, and basically when I click on that and then drag down with my mouse, you see what's happening. It's actually flattening that off, okay? And I just want to flatten that off so we have somewhat of a curved edge over here, and actually that doesn't look too bad. Maybe I'll just go down a tiny bit more. Okay, so something like that. That looks pretty good. Happy with that. Right then, so now we're going to move on to the stalk, okay? So I need this stalk to blend in with the pumpkin that we've just created. So we're going to use the merge option here, and that's going to blend it in. And again, we're going to go through the same process, give it some height, and then we're going to flatten it down like that. Okay, and then if we just zoom in, might help us if we just undraw our vectors as well, so we can see this a little bit better. Okay, so something like that. That looks pretty good. And as a base shape, I'm fairly happy with what we've got here. So then we can close out. So we've got our basic shapes, and you can see it is essentially that is very basic. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at adding in the details, but we're going to do that on a separate level to keep it all separate, and then ultimately we're going to blend everything together. So we're going to go over to our levels tab up here, and we're just going to right click on the base level, and we're going to insert a new level. And then on that level, we're going to right click and rename it, and we're going to call that one details. And then we'll just press enter, and we'll make sure that that's the active level, and we're just going to switch off the base levels. I don't need to see it right now. So let's just switch our vectors back on. So what we're going to do here, again, we're going to work through the same process. We're going to create rounded shapes. So we're going to take this one here, and then we're going to go into that rounded shape tool, and we're just going to create a little bit of a rounded shape. Okay, so that height seems okay, happy with that. Then we're going to take this one, we're going to do the same, like so, and then click this one, same over here, and this one, we'll pull that up, and then finally this one over here, like so. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the stalk details as well, and we're going to do the same. Okay, so we're going to click here. What I need to do is I need to set the combine mode of that to merge so it's blending in with the details of the pumpkin, because we can see we've got that overlap there. So we're going to go over here. Okay, it's already set to merge previously, so don't need to worry about changing that again. I'm just going to add in those profiles again, just pulling those shapes up and pulling it up like so. And that is pretty much it. So at this stage, you want to check over your heights. Nothing looks too crazy, nothing too tall. When you're working with reliefs, that's the whole point of them, is that they're reliefs, they're low level. So we don't want anything too high. And for the nature of the projects that we're creating as well, it needs to be fairly flat. Okay, so we're going to put that in the top view and we're going to close out. So we've pretty much modelled up all of the details for the pumpkin. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of sculpting just to sort of bring that sort of texture together. So we're going to take all of the components that we've just created. The easiest way to do this is go to your levels tab, hold down shift, select all of them. And then just to sort of keep our level tree to a minimum, we're just going to group them together like so, and then we're just going to duplicate that. And the reason I'm duplicating it is because I'm about to do a sculpt on all of them grouped together, but having the duplicate just ensures that I still have the building blocks of this and I have a safe copy. So I'm just going to uncheck the original group, and then we're going to work with this new group here. And with that, we're going to go and select it, and then we're going to go into the sculpting tools, okay? Software is going to flag up a warning, and it's going to ask if are we okay to continue with this, because we need to bake it as we're going into sculpt mode, which I am, so we'll go ahead and press OK. Right then, so the idea here is I want to blend all of these undulations, the details in the stalk, together but into 0, okay? So I want to create myself a real rough 0 plane here, and I can do this directly from the actual sculpting tools. To help myself, I'm also going to switch on my vectors so I can see where I want to sculpt out to. Okay, so we're going to use the smooth tool, and I'm just going to reduce my strength all the way down to 1, which is pretty much just nothing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck this option to preserve transparency. And what that means is it means that I am able to sculpt into our modelling plane, okay? So I'm just kind of going over the edge. I'm not too worried about the edge because we can crop it out. But I want to kind of bring everything together so that we have something to blend all of those shapes into, okay? So just gonna drag that around like so, and ensure that we get all inside of that stalk as well. And that's pretty much it. Right then, so now we've got our 0. What we want to do now is we want to switch on the preserve transparency. So now you can see I can't actually sculpt into our modelling plane because that's switched on. But now what I'm going to do is we're going to increase our strength, and we're just going to switch off our vectors, and then we're just going to start blending it in. And you can see why I wanted that 0 plane, because I wanted it to blend together in a more natural way rather than just confining everything just to the vectors. You'll have quite a harsh line if you didn't do that, which, I mean, you might want that, but in this case, I want it to look more natural. I want it to look like it's all part of the same piece, okay? So I'm just going back and forth with my mouse here. As always, with any relief model project, if you're going to be doing sculpting, I would totally recommend that you get a pen and tablet, like a Wacom or a Wacom. With a pen, you have more movement in your wrist, whereas with a mouse, you're very restricted in your movement, so you don't get that natural movement like you would with a pen. So if you're going to do that a lot, then I totally recommend that you get a pen. Otherwise, if it's something that you're only going to touch on every now and then, a mouse will suffice, but I always recommend a pen. Okay, right, so I'm happy with the sort of the blurring together of all of the parts here. And now you can see all I did smooth just over halfway in the strength, and it's kind of just bridged everything together nicely. So when you're happy with that, you go ahead and press OK, and that's pretty much that. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to take that, we're going to hold down Shift, and we're going to crop it back to our vector. Now what I need to do first is I actually need to create an outline vector that combines both the pumpkin and the stalk. So I'm going to take both of those vectors, I'm going to right click and say copy, then I'm going to paste them in, and then we're going to weld them. And you can see now I've got an outline here. So just to go back over that to weld, it's this icon over here. Right then, and so with that vector selected, Shift and hold our component down, and then we're going to go over to this icon here, and this allows us to clear everything outside of the selected vector. And when we do that, you'll see it's done that there for us, and so we're left with something like this. And then at which stage we can then go back into the sculpting tools if we wanted to do further work on that. Now in this case, what I want to do is I just want to sort of move on, and we're going to create the mouth and the nose. We're not going to do the eyes because we're going to look at using a toolpath operation to create the pockets for our tea lights to go in for the eyes. So here we're going to take our smiley face, okay, and then we're going to go back into that rounded tool, and then we're just going to come down and give that a shape like so. Perfect. And then we're going to go onto the nose, and again bring that down like so. Okay, right then, so let's just switch off those vectors. And now what we're going to do is we're going to switch on our base shape so we can see overall what that looks like. And then just to bring all of this together, what I would like to do is one final sculpt as one component. So into our levels, we're just going to minimize those. We're just going to insert a new level, rename that level. We're going to call that one pumpkin. Okay, and then we're going to use this icon over here. One of my favorite tools, this allows you to create a component from the visible model. So essentially it takes like a snapshot of what's in your composite view and creates a model based on that. So we'll do that, and it'll create that model, okay, and we can switch off the details level, switch off the base level, and now we have one solid component that is sort of an amalgamation of all of those things, but yet we still have access to all of those other parts. And so finally we can go in with a final sculpt here. Okay, if we just zoom in, we can just go over, this is softly there, onto the smooth tool for the mouth, like so, onto the nose. Okay, and then around the edges, if we wanted to perhaps increase that, just soften those edges there, and this is where the sort of detailed skin meets the base shape. Okay, and then move over like so. And just back and forth, and you can see we're just softening that join up, and then we'll do the same at the top over here, onto the stalk, over to the top, and you can be as minimal or as aggressive as you want with this sculpting. It depends how much time you want to put into it. At the moment that looks pretty good. I'm fairly happy with the result there. May want to just go in with the smudge and then just look at smudging the top portions. When you smudge, it's literally as it says, it's like you're smudging virtual clay. Okay, and then we could bring that in if we wanted to. But I'm happy with what we've got. Okay, so we'll just OK that, put that in the top view. And that is pretty much our model created. And so here we can click on that. You can just go over, check the size of that. Perhaps you might want to just bring it down a little and bring it up. Maybe 0.4 is not too bad, and that's pretty much it. So we've got our model, the vectors are done, and so at this stage it's time to think about the toolpaths. So we're going to switch over to the toolpaths tab, and then we'll just switch our vectors on as well so we can see those. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to go over to our material setup just to check over everything. And because we've got a 3D model, we need to position that somewhere in the thickness of the material that we plan to cut into. Okay, so all of this should be the same. So the thickness, your X, Y, Z, 0, all the same as how we set it up at the start. And then here we can see we have a model position in the material. So this lighter material represents our 3D model. We've got this slider here, we can move it up and down, depending where we want to position that within our piece of wood. So we're going to go with a gap below here. So I can see my model thickness is 0.3983. And what I want to do is I want to go with a gap below that's going to be around 0.2, okay? So I can see here we now have a gap above that is 0.26. Which we've got above there, then we've got our model, and then we've got a 0.2 underneath. And we'll use that for our profile cut in order for us to create tabs to cut this out. Right then you, of course, as always, you want to check over your wrapper Z gaps above the material, home and start position, ensuring everything's safe and appropriate for your particular setup. So first things first, we're going to take our outline vector, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at creating a 3D roughing toolpath. So we're going to go into the 3D roughing toolpath, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch end mill, okay? And then we're going to specify our machining limit boundary. So this is where we tell the software, you know, whereabouts do we want to machine? Do we want that to be the model boundary, the full material boundary, a vector boundary, or a level? Now in this case, we're going to go with a simple selected vector. We've got our vector selected. It's, you know, around the entirety of our 3D model. And then we specify our boundary offset. In this case, I'm going to go the full diameter of the tool. So the tool's going to roll all the way past the model by the diameter of the tool. We're going to have machine allowance in there, okay? So this is a thin piece of skin that we're going to leave on for our finishing tool to have something to bite to in order to cut out the finish pass, okay? So just going to go very small, 0.04 there. Next up, we specify our strategy, okay? So we have a Z-level strategy or a 3D raster. In this case, I'm just going to go the simple Z-level strategy. We can adjust the angle if you wanted to. For example, if you wanted it to go with the grain, against the grain. I'm just going to keep that at 0, so it's going to do that horizontal paths going up. And then what we can do is give that a name, so we'll just call that one 3D roughing, and we'll go ahead and calculate that. Okay, so that's the toolpath created there, and then if we go ahead and preview that, we can take a look at that. Cool, there we have it. So you can see all of the different steps based on the pass depth of our tool. And so now we're able to now go in with a smaller tool to get in there all that detail using a 3D finish toolpath. So we'll close out here. Okay, so again, let's just get our vectors up. We're going to go into the 3D finish toolpath. In this case, we're actually going to use a tapered ball nose here, okay? So we're using an 1/8 inch tapered ball nose. We'll go and just cancel out, so that's in my tools list here. Again, we're going to use the selected vector as our boundary. In terms of an offset, we're just going to go 0.1 past the model, so again, it rolls past the edge. We're doing that in a raster strategy, and we'll just call that one 3D finish, and then we'll go ahead and press calculate, and then the software will just take a moment to calculate that, in which case we can now preview that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You can see we've got all of the details there that's required, which is the beauty of this toolpath preview. You can check that, you know, the tool that you're using gives you the result that you want. Right then, so we'll just close out here, switch on our vector visibility there. I'm going to take these two eye vectors here. I'm going to do a pocket toolpath, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go into a pocket toolpath. Okay, we're going to set our start depth to be 0.1. Bear in mind we'd have already cut down already. And then we're going to set our cut depth to 0.4. Now, our T-lights are about 1/2 inch tall. So I'm just setting that cut depth to 0.4 so that a little bit of it sticks over. And obviously if you don't want to do that, then just, you know, make it flush, then you can do that. But in this case, I kind of want them just edging out just a little bit so that you know, it's pretty safe. Right then, we're going to use a 1/4 inch end mill here. We're going to do this in an offset strategy, so it's going to go around and round and round. And then we don't need to add in an allowance because we already created our vectors that they're big enough for those T-lights. And then we'll go ahead and press calculate. Obviously, it goes without saying that when you are creating toolpaths for things to slot into other things, you should always just test it whilst you've got your material on the machine. Then that way, if you find out it doesn't fit, you can always just do an overcut until you get the sweet spot for it to sit in there. Okay, right then, so I'm fairly happy with what we've got there. And then simply it's a case now of running our cutout paths. So we're going to take our outer vector into the profile toolpath. And we're going to cut all the way through. So I'm going to put in Z equals here. And then we're going to go with a 1/4 inch end mill on the outside. So it's going outside of that vector. We're going to add tabs to our toolpath. So if we go to edit tabs here, we can just go in and position them like so. And we can close out. So here I've given them a length of a 1/4 inch and a very sort of thin thickness of 0.15. That's ample enough in this case at this size. So then we want to look at just adding in some more fancy options to our toolpath. So we're going to look at adding ramps and leads, okay? So we'll start with leads. So leads are really useful in that you can basically plunge down outside of the actual vector itself and then lead into the cut. So this will help reduce like plunge markings on the edge of your part because you're actually plunging in elsewhere and then it's going to lead into your vector. Whilst we're doing, and with that, we're going to do that in a circular lead. You've got lots of different options to choose how big you want that lead to be. We also want a lead out as well. And with that, I actually want to apply a ramp where I want to ramp in on the lead. So rather than us plunging straight down into the material, we're actually going to ramp in a sort of a diagonal motion. And that's just going to help the wear and tear and longevity of the actual tool itself. Okay, so here we're just going to go and call this one profile, and then we'll calculate that, and then we can preview it and take a look at the effect of that. Those tabs are there, and you can see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm really happy with that toolpath preview here. And so I think at this stage, we're at a point where we could go ahead now and actually save out those toolpaths to cut them out. So let's take a look at that and keep your eyes out for some other extras that we've got in there. Right then, so you may have seen there were other characters. I couldn't help myself. I had to draw up some other characters to create a little collection. We've got a little ghost, we've also got a skull as well, and they all look super cute. Really like how they've turned out. And the way the tea lights sit in their eyes is to make them even more spooky. Everything else for the other characters, we pretty much modelled the same way as the pumpkin. The only difference is in terms of the ghost, the skirt, I actually use a 2-rail sweep, which we'll have a look at in a second. And then for the skull, you can see that we've got scars on there that we've V-carved, and so we'll talk about that. But otherwise, everything was pretty simple to model it. So we'll jump into the software and I'll show you how we modelled the ghost. Right then, so here's our file. So you can see we've got our ghost sheet here. Here's all the vectors. We've got our skull at the bottom there. And we're going to quickly focus now on drawing up the model for our ghost. So we're going to maximize the 3D view. And just like before, we're going to take the outer shape here, and then we're going to apply a rounded shape. So we're going to really lift that right up like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flatten that off again, just like we did before. Okay, so something like that looks okay. And then on top of that, we're going to take this vector here, and we're just going to apply a very subtle sort of rounded shape, okay? Something like that. Right then, so that's pretty much the base shape in this case. Next up, we're going to look at creating the skirt, okay? So you can see we've got all of these vectors at the bottom here. And I'd like to create the look that we've got bulk at the bottom, but we want it to fade into zero, like into the actual ghost base at the top. And so we're going to look at using the 2-rail sweep. So if we close out, just tile our windows, zoom in over here. So we're going to use the 2-rail sweep, and the 2-rail sweep icon can be found over here. And the idea is that you can take a profile or a series of profiles, and you can sweep them between 2 vectors, hence the name the 2-rail sweep. So for example, you can see this vector here and this vector here. Whilst they look like they're closed vectors, I've actually separated them, which is why they are 2 different vectors. And these are going to be our 2 rails. And so when you use the option here to use selection, it transforms those vectors into drive rails. And we can see that because they're now red and green, and they've got arrows. And they're both pointing in the same direction, which is exactly what I want here. Right then, so at the top here, I want that to be flat. I want this to have a flatness at 0, which is why I've just drawn a horizontal line. That just means there's nothing, there's no shape there at all. And I'm going to apply another horizontal line somewhere around the middle. So it's going to be nothing, nothing. And then I want to go into this rounded shape at the bottom. So I select that shape, and then I apply it to the bottom by clicking on that. And then I could go ahead and press apply. And you can see the result of that there. So we've got a nice rounded shape that then just tapers off into nothing and blends into the actual ghost itself. And you can see the effect of that's really nice. So we're going to do the same again. So start a new component. I'm going to select these 2 vectors, use selection. You can see this time the start point is at the bottom. So we want the rounded profile at the bottom there. And then we're going to take the flat one into the middle, up to the top. Go ahead and apply that, and you can see the effect of that there. And then what we're going to do is start a new component. We're going to take this vector here, use selection, and again just go through the same process of applying those cross sections. Okay, so we're going to go flat in the middle, flat at the top, and go ahead and press apply. And then finally we'll take the last one, take both of those, use selection, and then in which case we're going to take that rounded profile at the bottom, flat shape in the middle, at the top, and then go ahead and press apply, and then close out. And you can see the skirt there. Right then, the next up, we can then take our scary mouth here, and we'll just apply a regular rounded shape in there, and we're just going to pull that down. So we're creating a recess, so it looks something like that. And then it's a case then of simply sculpting everything together. So we're going to go into the sculpting tools, but before we do that, what we should do is if we just minimize that level, and then we'll go ahead and create a new level, in which case we can use this option to create a model of everything that it's already in our composition, so we can still have access to all of the details, but we're manipulating this final model. And then we can go into the sculpting tools, and then it's simply a case of us just smoothing, be quite strong on the smooth there, and it's just simply a case of us just blending all of those parts together like so. And we'll just keep going round, just softening that. If we zoom right in here, and you can see we're just really softening those edges. And what's really nice here, as you can see, it is just naturally going into nothing of the ghost, because we set that 2-rail sweep to finish on a flat plane. Okay, then we're going to use a smudge tool, and what we can do is we can accentuate the curves there, the join between the top and the base, by just smudging that. We'll do the same over here, so being quite aggressive here, just by pulling, pushing and pulling, moving that around. And you do that until you're happy with it. I mean, at this stage it looks pretty good, but if you wanted to do a little bit more, you could then simply go in and just accentuate the areas that you need. I'm just going to go around the edge there and just soften that over all around, so we sort of remove the line where the rounded shape sits on top of the sort of flat rounded shape, and that's pretty much that. And we could go ahead and press OK, turn off those vectors, and then that's pretty much the ghost there. Right then, so we're going to jump into a later iteration there, and once I modelled that, it was simply a case of going through those toolpaths, just as we did for the pumpkin one that we've got here. Same applies to the skull as well. So again, when we look at the skull, I just modelled it with the same sort of flat rounded shape. I added these extra lumps here, so if we put our vectors on, we've got the lumps for the eyebrows, we've got a negative shape here for the nose, but you can see I've got these vectors here, and with these vectors I actually want to V-carve that. And the way we're going to do this, and if you wanted to V-carve onto a 3D model, then you need to look at creating a toolpath that actually projects onto your 3D model, so it ensures that you're actually cutting onto the model and not onto, you know, your 0 plane or wherever you've set your start depth, cut depth. So let's just take a look at that. So here we are looking at our preview. So we've got our 3D roughing, our 3D finishing has already been previewed here for our skull, and then we can close out, and then what we could do is we could jump into our V-carve toolpath. Okay, so you can see we've got these vectors highlighted here. Here we're setting a start depth of 0 using a 60-degree half-inch V-bit, and then the important thing here is to project that toolpath onto the model, in which case you can go ahead and calculate that, and then you can preview that, and you can see it's actually V-carving onto that 3D model. Again, we've got a pocket toolpath here for those T-lights, and then finally we've got that profile toolpath. And so that's pretty much it. So you saw there how we modelled the skirt there for the ghost, and again, the toolpaths are pretty much exactly the same for the pumpkin, and then obviously with the skull, same sort of setup, same techniques that we've used, except we've had the addition of that V-carve toolpath. Well then, so there we have it. I absolutely love how all of these turned out. They're super cute, and these will make really nice Halloween decorations, gifts, or you know, you could cut a load of these and sell them at your next craft fair. Now, in terms of the files, so you can get access to the file that we've gone through today from the user group meeting bundle. So that's an Aspire file, but we're also throwing in some V3Ms of the models, the 3 models that you can see here, so that if you've got V-carve, you can also make use of them as well. So I hope you liked this video, and if you did, then give us a thumbs up, and we will catch you very soon. Thank you.